I attended my wife's workplace social dinner party and saw that my place card said, "Clueless idiot trash." My wife, her lover male boss, and her co-workers laughed out loud. "Beggar," they shouted. But when I was about to go home, I told the president, "I'm cutting ties with you. My name is Jared Winslow, and if you told me 6 months ago that I'd be sitting here in my workshop at 2 in the morning, surrounded by sawdust and the ghosts of what used to be my marriage, I would have laughed in your face. But here I am, running my fingers along the grain of this mahogany table I'm building, trying to make sense of how everything went so damn wrong so fast." Let me back up. For the past 8 years, I've been married to Bianca Winslow. Well, technically she kept her maiden name Martinez for professional reasons, but you get the picture. She's what you'd call a rising star at Reinhardt and Rowe, one of those high-end design firms downtown, where they charge $5 grand just to tell you what color to paint your bathroom. Me? I run Craftwise Builds, my own little woodworking company that I started in our garage and somehow managed to turn into something decent. Nothing flashy, mind you. I'm not building custom yachts or anything crazy like that. Just honest work. Kitchen cabinets, built-in bookshelves, maybe a dining room table for someone's anniversary. The kind of stuff that lasts longer than the people who buy it. Bianca always said she was proud of what I did, especially when her fancy coworkers needed something made, and I'd give them the friends and family discount. "My husband's a real craftsman," she'd tell them, and I'd feel that warm glow you get when the person you love actually sees you for who you are. Or at least, that's what I thought was happening. About 3 weeks ago, she came home from work with this weird energy, part excited, part nervous, like a kid who knows they're about to get caught doing something they shouldn't. She was standing in our kitchen, still in that sharp black blazer she wears when she wants to look important, and she just blurted it out. "The company's having their annual social dinner next Friday. You should come with me." Now, this might not sound like a big deal to you, but Bianca had never invited me to one of these things before. In 8 years of marriage, I'd heard about plenty of company events, the Christmas parties, the summer barbecues, the team-building weekends in the Hamptons, but I was never part of the equation. "It's just work stuff," she'd always say. "You'd be bored out of your mind." And honestly, I was fine with that. I figured hanging out with a bunch of pretentious designers talking about feng shui and sustainable materials wasn't exactly my scene anyway. But this time was different. She was practically bouncing on her heels when she asked me, and there was something in her voice that made me think this actually mattered to her. Maybe she finally wanted to show me off, you know? Maybe after all these years of keeping her work life and her home life in separate boxes, she was ready to let them overlap a little. "Really?" I asked, setting down the beer I'd been nursing. "You want me there?" "Of course I do," she said, and she gave me that smile, the one that made me fall for her in the first place. Back when we were both broke college kids, and the future felt like this wide-open road we were going to travel together. "It'll be fun. Good food, good wine, and you'll finally get to meet everyone I work with." I should have paid more attention to the way she said everyone. There was something off about it, like she was testing out the word to see how it tasted. But I was too busy feeling flattered to notice the warning signs. "What's the dress code?" I asked, already mentally going through my closet. I had maybe 2 suits that didn't smell like would stain, and one of them still had a small burn mark from when I'd gotten too close to the Sanders last winter. "Just wear your navy suit," she said, already pulling out her phone to text someone. "The one you wore to my cousin's wedding. You looked really handsome in that." The way she said it, casual and distracted, made me feel like I was already an afterthought in her planning. But I pushed that feeling down. This was supposed to be a good thing, right? My wife wanted me by her side at an important work event. That had to mean something. Over the next week, I found myself actually looking forward to it. I got the suit dry cleaned, bought a new tie. Nothing too flashy, just a simple dark blue that would blend in without making me look like I was trying too hard. I even watched a few YouTube videos about wine tasting, just in case the conversation went in that direction. I wanted to make a good impression, not just for me, but for Bianca. I knew how much her career meant to her, and if being a good husband meant schmoozing with her boss and pretending to care about the difference between eggshell and ivory paint, then that's what I was going to do. The night before the dinner, I was in the workshop putting the finishing touches on a jewelry box I'd been making for our anniversary. Just a small thing, walnut with cherry inlays, the kind of piece that takes forever to get right, but feels worth it when you finally do. Bianca came down to tell me she was going to bed, and she paused in the doorway like she wanted to say something else. You nervous about tomorrow? I asked, not looking up from the delicate work I was doing on the hinges. No, she said, but there was something in her voice that suggested otherwise. Are you? I set down my tools and turned to look at her. She was wearing that old Princeton t-shirt she'd had since college, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and for a second, she looked exactly like the girl I'd married. Young and uncertain and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the expensive clothes and perfect makeup she wore to work. Should I be? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, and I got the feeling she was having some kind of internal debate with herself. Finally, she shook her head and gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. No, she said. Everything's going to be fine. That should have been my second warning sign. But like an idiot, I believed her. Everything was not going to be fine. Friday rolled around faster than I expected, and by the time 6 o'clock hit, I was already feeling that familiar knot in my stomach that comes with trying to fit into someone else's world. I'd spent the better part of the afternoon getting ready. Showering twice because the first time I still smelled like the pine I'd been working with all week, shaving carefully around that scar on my jaw from a router accident 3 years back, and making sure my navy suit looked as good as it was going to get on a guy who spends most of his time in work boots and flannel shirts. Bianca had been getting ready upstairs for what felt like hours, and when she finally came down the stairs, I swear my heart stopped for a second. She was wearing this navy silk dress that hugged her in all the right places, and her dark hair was pulled back in some kind of elegant twist that probably took her an hour to perfect. The woman knew how to make an entrance. I'll give her that. Damn, babe, I said, standing up from the couch where I'd been nervously checking my phone. You look absolutely stunning. She paused at the bottom of the stairs and smoothed down the front of her dress, but instead of giving me that pleased smile I was expecting, she just kind of nodded and said, thanks. Not, thank you. Not, you look great too. Just a flat, distracted thanks, like I'd commented on the weather. That should have been my first clue that something was off, but I was too busy trying to be supportive to really process it. Maybe she was just nervous about the dinner, right? Big work events can be stressful, especially when you're trying to climb the corporate ladder at a place like Reinhardt and Rowe. Ready to go? I asked, grabbing my keys from the bowl by the front door. I guess, she said, which wasn't exactly the enthusiastic response I was hoping for. The drive to the venue took about 20 minutes, and I spent most of it trying to make conversation while Bianca stared out the passenger window like she was watching a movie I couldn't see. I tried talking about work first. Told her about this new project I'd landed building custom cabinets for a young couple who'd just bought their first house. Usually, she liked hearing about my clients, especially the ones who were just starting out and reminded us of ourselves when we were younger and broker. That's nice, she said, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. So I switched gears and asked about her work instead. How's that hotel lobby project coming along? The one downtown with all the crazy lighting requirements. Fine, she said. It's fine. I tried one more time, bringing up something completely different. This documentary I'd watched about traditional Japanese woodworking techniques that I thought she might find interesting since she was always going on about the importance of craftsmanship in design. But all I got was another distracted nod and a that told me her mind was somewhere else entirely. By the time we pulled into the parking lot of the venue, some upscale place called the Meridian that looked like it charged $50 just to walk through the front door, I was starting to feel like I was taking a stranger to prom. The woman sitting next to me looked like my wife, but she sure as hell wasn't acting like her. You okay? I asked as I turned off the engine. You seem a little off tonight. For a second, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or fear, but it was gone so fast I might have imagined it. I'm fine, she said, already reaching for the door handle. Just want to make a good impression, you know? I didn't know, actually, because in all the years I'd known Bianca, she'd never been the type to get nervous about social situations. She was the one who could walk into a room full of strangers and have half of them eating out of her hand within 10 minutes. Confidence was kind of her thing. But before I could ask any more questions, she was already out of the car and smoothing down her dress again, putting on what I now realized was her game face. I hurried to catch up with her, straightening my tie as we walked toward the entrance. That's when I saw him. Lennox Carter was standing just inside the glass doors, and the moment he spotted Bianca through the windows, his whole face lit up like she was the best thing he'd seen all day. He was a good-looking guy, I'll admit, tall, well-dressed, with that kind of easy smile that probably made clients want to hand over their credit cards without asking too many questions. But there was something about the way he was looking at my wife that made every instinct I had start screaming. When we walked through the doors, Lennox stepped forward immediately, and I watched as his eyes did this quick sweep over Bianca, from her face down to her shoes and back up again, like he was appraising a piece of art he was thinking about buying. "Bianca," he said, and his voice was warm in a way that felt too familiar, too intimate for a boss greeting an employee. "You look incredible tonight." She smiled. Actually smiled, the first real expression I'd seen from her all evening, and said, "Thank you, Lennox. You clean up pretty well yourself." And that's when I knew. Maybe not the whole truth, not yet, but enough to understand that whatever was happening between them had been going on for a while. The way they looked at each other, the comfortable rhythm of their conversation, the fact that he hadn't even acknowledged my existence yet, it all pointed to something I really didn't want to think about. Finally, Lennox turned to me with that practiced smile of his, the one he probably used on clients he didn't particularly like, but had to be nice to anyway. "And you must be Jared," he said, extending his hand. "We've heard so much about you." "Yeah," I thought as I shook his hand and felt him squeeze just a little too hard. "I'll bet you have." Following Lennox inside felt like walking into some kind of fever dream. The venue was one of those places that screamed money from every surface. Crystal chandeliers hanging from a vaulted ceiling, marble floors so polished you could probably shave in their reflection, and walls lined with abstract art that probably cost more than I made in a year. Everything glittered under the warm lighting, and the sound of laughter and conversation echoed off the hard surfaces in a way that made me feel like I was walking into an echo chamber of privilege. I stuck close to Bianca as we moved through the crowd, but it was like watching her transform into someone I barely recognized. The distant, nervous woman from the car ride had vanished, replaced by this confident, social butterfly who seemed to know everyone and light up every conversation she joined. It was impressive, honestly, but also kind of unsettling. Like watching an actress slip into character right in front of your eyes. Her coworkers swarmed around her almost immediately, a mix of men and women in designer clothes who all had that particular look of people who spent too much money on things that were supposed to make them look effortless. They complimented her dress, her hair, her earrings, and she ate it up like she'd been starving for attention all week. "Bianca, you look absolutely radiant tonight," gushed this redhead in a black cocktail dress who I vaguely remembered meeting at some company Christmas party years ago. "That dress is stunning on you," added another woman with perfectly straight blonde hair and lips so glossy they reflected the chandelier light. "You have to tell us where you got those shoes," chimed in a third. And suddenly Bianca was the center of this little circle of admiration, basking in the attention like a cat in a sunbeam. And me? I might as well have been invisible. Not one of them acknowledged my presence. Not a single "nice to see you again, Jared," or "how's the woodworking business," or even just a polite nod in my direction. I stood there next to my wife like a piece of furniture she'd dragged along and forgotten about. At first, I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were just excited to see Bianca and would include me in the conversation once the initial hellos were over. But as the minutes ticked by and the circle of admirers grew larger, it became pretty clear that I wasn't part of the equation. I was the plus one who didn't matter, the husband who was there to be seen but not heard. Bianca didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't seem to care. She was in her element, talking shop about upcoming projects and industry trends, laughing at inside jokes I didn't understand, and generally acting like she belonged in this world of expensive taste and designer everything. Eventually, someone, I think it was Lennox, though I couldn't see him through the crowd, called for everyone to find their seats for dinner. The group started migrating toward a long table that had been set up in the center of the room, covered with a white tablecloth so crisp it looked like it had been starched and ironed that afternoon. Gold-rimmed plates caught the light from the chandeliers, and crystal glasses stood at attention like little soldiers waiting for orders. Each place setting had a small white card with elegant script writing, the kind of calligraphy that probably cost more per letter than most people spend on groceries. People were wandering around the table, looking for their names, chatting and laughing as they found their assigned spots. I followed Bianca around the table's perimeter, watching her scan the place cards with the focused intensity of someone taking a test. When she found hers, positioned about halfway down the table's length, she smiled and touched the card lightly with her fingertip. "Here I am," she said, then looked around for mine. "You should be right around here somewhere." I started checking the cards near hers, expecting to find my name on one of the neighboring spots. Jared Winslow, maybe, or Mr. Winslow if they were being formal. But as I moved from card to card, I wasn't seeing my name anywhere. Then I found it. The card was positioned directly across from Bianca's seat, and at first glance, I thought there had been some kind of mistake. The calligraphy was beautiful, just like all the others, but the words didn't make sense. I picked up the card and read it again, certain I was misunderstanding something. But no, there it was, in elegant script that had probably taken someone 20 minutes to perfect. "Clueless idiot trash." I stood there holding the card, staring at those 3 words like they were written in a foreign language I was trying to translate. This had to be wrong. This had to be some kind of printing error, or maybe the cards had gotten mixed up somehow. There was no way, absolutely no way, that someone had deliberately written this. But as I looked around the table, I started noticing things. The way conversations had gotten quieter. The way people were glancing in my direction and then quickly looking away. The way Bianca was standing frozen next to her chair, her face pale under her carefully applied makeup. And then it started. The laughter. It began as a snicker from somewhere behind me, then grew into a chuckle, then exploded into full-blown, stomach-holding, tears-in-the-eyes laughter that filled the entire room. Person after person joined in until the sound was bouncing off the marble floors and crystal chandeliers like some kind of acoustic nightmare. Lennox was laughing the hardest, his face red with the effort of it, one hand pressed to his chest like he was trying to keep his heart from bursting with joy. Someone, I couldn't see who through the blur that was starting to cloud my vision, shouted, "Beggar," and the laughter got even louder. And my wife, who was supposed to be on my side, who was supposed to have my back no matter what, was giggling. Not laughing outright like the others, but giggling like a teenager who'd just heard the best joke of her life. That's when I understood. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some cruel prank that had gotten out of hand. This was planned. This was deliberate. And Bianca, the woman I'd loved and supported and built a life with, had been in on it from the beginning. Standing there with that damn place card in my hand, surrounded by the sound of their laughter echoing off every polished surface in the room, I felt something inside me just break. Not snap, like you'd expect, but break slowly, like a piece of wood that's been carrying too much weight for too long and finally gives up trying to hold everything together. The logical part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through 8 years of marriage and built a successful business from nothing, was screaming at me to do something. Flip the table. Throw the card in Lennox's smug face. Tell every single one of these pretentious assholes exactly what I thought of their little joke. Walk out. Make a scene. Demand some goddamn respect. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I just stood there like an idiot, holding that card and watching their faces. Really watching them. Memorizing every detail of this moment, so I'd never forget what it felt like to realize that the people I'd been trying to impress thought I was nothing more than entertainment. A punchline to a joke I hadn't even known was being told. Lennox was practically doubled over, his perfect hair falling into his eyes as he laughed. The redhead from earlier had her hand pressed to her mouth, like she was trying to contain herself, but her shoulders were shaking with the effort of holding it in. The blonde with the glossy lips was wiping tears from her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. And Bianca, Jesus, Bianca was the worst part of all. She wasn't laughing as hard as the others, but she was definitely laughing, covering it up with her hand, trying to look embarrassed about it, but not embarrassed enough to stop, not embarrassed enough to defend me, not embarrassed enough to tell her coworkers that this was her husband they were humiliating. That's when she leaned in close to me, close enough that I could smell her perfume and feel her breath on my ear, and whispered, "It's just a joke, Jared. Don't embarrass me. Don't embarrass her." Those 4 words hit me harder than all the laughter combined. Because right there, in that whispered plea, was everything I needed to know about where I stood in my wife's world. I wasn't her partner. I wasn't her equal. I was a potential source of embarrassment that she had to manage and control. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something in her eyes that I'd probably been missing for months, maybe years. She wasn't ashamed of what her coworkers had done. She was worried about what I might do in response. She was worried that I might ruin her image, might make her look bad in front of the people she was trying so hard to impress. The laughter was starting to die down now, replaced by expectant silence as everyone waited to see how I'd react. Would I lose my temper? Would I storm out? Would I give them the dramatic scene they were probably hoping for? I felt my fingers tighten around the napkin that had been placed next to the offensive place card. For a second, I imagined what it would feel like to flip that perfectly set table, to send all those gold-rimmed plates and crystal glasses crashing to the marble floor, to tell Lennox exactly what I thought of him and his amateur hour power plays, to grab Bianca's arm and drag her out of there like a man with some self-respect would do. But I didn't do any of that either. Instead, I set the place card down carefully on the table, pulled out the chair, and sat down. Slowly, deliberately, like a man who had all the time in the world and nowhere else he'd rather be. The silence that followed was different from the expectant quiet that had come after the laughter. This was uncomfortable silence. Confused silence. They'd set up their little trap expecting fireworks, and instead they got nothing. Just a guy calmly taking his assigned seat at their fancy dinner table. I spread the napkin across my lap and looked around the table, making eye contact with each person who had been laughing just moments before. Not in an aggressive way, not like I was trying to stare them down or intimidate them. Just looking, taking inventory, counting faces and filing away names for future reference. Because here's the thing about people like this. People who think they're better than everyone else. People who find their entertainment in humiliating others. They don't know what to do when their target refuses to play the victim. They expect anger. They expect hurt feelings and dramatic exits, and maybe some crying. What they don't expect is calm acceptance. Lennox was the first to break. He cleared his throat and said, "Come on, Jared, it's just a little fun. We're all creative types here. We have a sense of humor." I nodded politely and reached for my water glass. "I can see that," I said, my voice steady and conversational. "Very creative." Bianca was staring at me from across the table, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out what I was thinking. Good. Let her wonder. Let her sit there in her beautiful silk dress and wonder what was going through her husband's mind. The truth was, I wasn't sure myself. All I knew was that something fundamental had shifted in the last few minutes. The man who had walked into this restaurant trying to make a good impression on his wife's coworkers was gone. In his place was someone I didn't entirely recognize yet. Someone who was done caring what these people thought of him. Someone who was just getting started. I picked up the offensive place card again and studied it like I was examining a piece of craftsmanship. The calligraphy really was beautiful, I had to admit. Someone had put real effort into making my humiliation look elegant. "You know," I said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "this is really nice work. Very professional. I'm curious, who's the artist?" The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Nobody wanted to claim credit now that the joke had fallen flat. I smiled and placed the card carefully next to my plate, like it was something precious I wanted to keep as a memento. "Well," I said, "whoever it was, they've got real talent." And then I waited to see what would happen next. The first course arrived with all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect from a place that charged more for one meal than most people spend on groceries in a month. Some kind of fancy salad with ingredients I couldn't pronounce, arranged on plates that looked like they belonged in an art museum. The servers moved around the table with practiced precision, setting down each plate like they were handling rare artifacts, and suddenly everyone had something to focus on besides the elephant in the room, or rather, the clueless idiot trash sitting at their perfectly appointed table. I ate slowly, methodically, making sure to use the right fork from the collection they'd laid out beside my plate. Years of watching Bianca navigate these kinds of social situations had taught me a thing or two about proper etiquette, even if I'd never had much occasion to use it. Every bite was deliberate, every sip of wine calculated to show these people that I wasn't going anywhere, wasn't going to be rushed or intimidated into leaving. The conversation gradually resumed around me, but it was forced now, artificial in a way that hadn't been there before. People were trying too hard to act normal, like nothing had happened, but I could feel their eyes on me whenever they thought I wasn't looking, waiting for me to crack, maybe, or trying to figure out what my game was. About halfway through the main course, Some pretentious piece of fish that probably had its own Wikipedia page. Lennox finally made his move. He'd been quiet during most of the meal, which surprised me. I'd expected him to be the type who couldn't let a moment of silence pass without filling it with the sound of his own voice. But he'd been patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. He leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, and fixed me with that smug smile of his. The one that said he knew something I didn't, that he was operating on a level I couldn't possibly understand. It was the kind of smile that probably worked great on clients and subordinates, but it just made me want to see how long it would take to wipe it off his face. "You know, Jared," he said, his voice carrying that casual authority that comes with being used to having people listen when you talk. "I have to say, you're taking this whole thing a lot better than I expected." The table got quiet again. Not the uncomfortable silence from before, but the kind of focused attention you get when everyone knows something important is about to happen. Even the servers seemed to sense it, hanging back near the kitchen doors instead of circulating with their wine bottles and water pitchers. "Am I?" I asked, cutting another piece of my fish with the precise movements I used when I was working on a particularly delicate joint. "What exactly were you expecting?" Lennox's smile widened, and I could see him settling into what he probably thought was going to be a fun little power play. The kind of verbal chess match he was used to winning because he held all the cards and made all the rules. "Well," he said, swirling his wine like he was some kind of sommelier, "most people would be pretty upset about finding a place card like that. Might even cause a scene. Storm out, maybe throw a few accusations around." He paused to take a sip, clearly enjoying himself. "But you're just sitting there, calm as can be." "It's interesting." I nodded thoughtfully, like he'd just shared some profound insight about human nature. "You seem to know a lot about how most people would react to being humiliated at a dinner party." "Experience," he said with a shrug that was meant to look casual but came across as practiced. "You deal with enough different personality types in this business, you start to recognize patterns." "I bet you do." I took a sip of my own wine, which was admittedly pretty good, even if I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of saying so. "Must be nice, being able to predict how people will behave. Makes it easier to manipulate them, I'd imagine." That got a reaction. Not a big one. Lennox was too smooth for that. But I caught the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his smile became just a fraction less natural. He wasn't used to people calling him out so directly, especially not in front of an audience. "Manipulate is a strong word," he said, but his voice had lost some of its casual confidence. "I prefer to think of it as social dynamics. Understanding what makes people tick." "Right." I leaned forward slightly, matching his casual posture. "So, when you had someone write clueless idiot trash on my place card, that was just you understanding what makes me tick?" The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the soft jazz music they had playing in the background, something I hadn't even noticed before. Lennox's smile faltered for just a moment before he managed to prop it back up, but it was too late. Everyone at the table had seen it slip. "Relax, Jared," he said, and now there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. "We're all creative types here. We have a sense of humor. You can't take everything so seriously." There it was. The deflection. The attempt to make me the problem for not appreciating their little joke. It was exactly what I'd expected and exactly what I'd been waiting for. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each person who had been laughing earlier. Some of them were staring at their plates now, suddenly fascinated by their food. Others were watching the exchange with the kind of morbid curiosity you get when you're watching a car accident happen in slow motion. Then I looked at Bianca. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her face carefully neutral. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was holding herself like she was braced for impact. She knew what was coming, even if she didn't know exactly what form it would take. "You're absolutely right, Lennox," I said, my voice as calm and measured as it had been all evening. "I should definitely relax. After all, what's a little humiliation between friends?" I raised my wine glass in a mock toast, and the gesture was so unexpected that a few people actually lifted their glasses in response before they realized what they were doing. "To creative types," I said, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear, "and their sense of humor." Lennox was still smiling, but it looked painted on now, like a mask that was starting to crack around the edges. He raised his own glass, probably because he didn't know what else to do, and that's when I knew I had him. Because here's the thing about bullies. They're only comfortable when they're in control. When they can predict how their victims will react, when they can stay one step ahead of the conversation. But when someone refuses to play by their rules, when someone turns their own game against them, they don't know what to do with themselves. And Lennox Carter was about to find out just how creative a simple woodworker could be. The rest of the meal passed in a kind of suspended animation, like everyone at the table was holding their breath waiting for something to explode. Dessert came, some elaborate chocolate thing that probably took 3 pastry chefs and a degree in engineering to construct. And I ate every bite, making sure to compliment the presentation loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. The wine kept flowing, conversations resumed in fits and starts, but there was an undercurrent of tension running through everything now that nobody could quite shake off. Lennox had retreated into damage control mode, working overtime to charm the other guests and restore the jovial atmosphere he'd been orchestrating all evening. But I could see the calculation behind every laugh, every casual gesture, every attempt to get things back on track. The man was rattled, even if he was doing his best to hide it. Bianca hadn't said a word to me since her whispered plea not to embarrass her. She was playing the part of the sophisticated professional, engaging in animated conversations about upcoming projects and industry trends. But I caught her glancing in my direction more than once, trying to read my mood, maybe, or figure out what I was planning to do next. The truth was, I wasn't entirely sure myself. Something had shifted inside me during that exchange with Lennox, something fundamental that I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. It was like walking into my workshop and realizing that all my tools had been rearranged. Everything looked familiar, but the relationships between things had changed in ways that would take time to fully understand. What I didn't know was that I was done being the joke, done being the husband who was supposed to smile and nod and be grateful for whatever scraps of respect these people felt like throwing my way, done pretending that what had happened tonight was acceptable or funny or anything other than a calculated attempt to put me in my place. As the evening wound down and people started checking their phones and making noises about early meetings tomorrow, I made my decision. Not the explosive, table-flipping decision that part of me still wanted to make, but something more surgical, more precise. I waited until the servers had cleared away the last of the dessert plates, and people were starting to push back from the table. That moment when a formal dinner begins its transition into casual conversation and eventual departure. Then I stood up, smoothed down my tie, and began walking around the table toward the head, where Vincent Maddox had been holding court all evening. Vincent was Reinhardt and Rose president, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of presence that came from decades of closing deals and managing personalities. I'd met him exactly once before, about 3 years ago when I'd done some custom millwork for their office renovation. He'd been impressed with my craftsmanship then, had even mentioned something about how rare it was to find someone who understood the importance of quality in a world full of shortcuts and cheap alternatives. As I approached, Vincent looked up from his conversation with a woman I didn't recognize. Some client or potential partner, judging by the way she was dressed and the intensity of their discussion. He smiled when he saw me coming, the kind of polite, slightly confused smile you give someone you recognize but can't quite place. "Jared, isn't it?" he said, extending his hand. "Good to see you again. How's the woodworking business?" "It's going well. Thank you for asking," I replied, shaking his hand with the firm grip my father had taught me when I was 12 years old. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my photos until I found the one I'd taken earlier. The place card, in all its elegant, insulting glory, captured in perfect detail on my phone's camera. I'd snapped the picture while everyone was distracted by their salads, some instinct telling me I might need evidence of what had happened here tonight. "This is how your VP and your staff chose to welcome me to your company's annual dinner," I said, holding the phone so Vincent could see the screen clearly. The change in his expression was immediate and dramatic. The polite smile vanished, replaced by something between shock and horror as he read those 3 words written in beautiful calligraphy. He took the phone from my hands, studying the image like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "This is," he started, then stopped, his face flushing red with what I hoped was embarrassment and anger. "Jared, I am so sorry. This is not who we are as a company. This is not how we treat anyone, let alone." let alone the contractor who's been providing your firm with custom cabinetry and installations for the past 6 years. I finished for him. The same contractor who built those conference room shelves you complimented last month, and the reception desk that 3 different design magazines have photographed for feature articles. Vincent's flush deepened, and I could see him processing not just the immediate insult, but all the broader implications. The potential legal exposure, the damage to the company's reputation if this got out, the complete failure of leadership that had allowed something like this to happen under his watch. "Jared, please," he said, his voice taking on the careful tone of someone trying to defuse a bomb. "Let me make this right. This is completely unacceptable, and whoever was responsible will face serious consequences. But surely we can." "Vincent," I interrupted, keeping my voice calm and professional. "I appreciate the apology, I really do. But I think we both know that apologies don't fix this kind of thing. Trust, once it's broken, doesn't just snap back together like a piece of wood with some glue and clamps." I took my phone back and slipped it into my pocket, then looked him directly in the eye with the same steady gaze I used when I was explaining a complicated joint to a client who didn't understand why quality took time. "Effective tonight," I said, each word clear and deliberate. "I'm cutting all ties with Reinhardt and Rowe. No more custom work, no more installations, no more partnership of any kind. Craftwise Builds will be finding clients who understand the value of respect." The silence that followed was absolute. Vincent stared at me like I'd just told him his building was on fire, and I could sense rather than see the attention of everyone else at the table shifting in our direction. This was the scene they'd been waiting for all evening, just not the one they'd expected. "You don't have to do this," Vincent said quietly. "We can work something out. Make amends. Surely." But I was already walking away, heading for the exit with the measured pace of a man who had said everything that needed to be said. Behind me, I could hear Vincent's voice, sharp with authority now instead of apology. "Lennox, my office. First thing Monday morning." I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The empire was already starting to crack. Walking out of the Meridian felt like stepping out of a fever dream and back into the real world. The cool night air hit my face, cutting through the fog of wine and adrenaline that had been building all evening, and for the first time in hours I could actually breathe properly. My hands weren't shaking. I was surprised to discover that, and my heart rate was steady, like I'd just finished a particularly satisfying piece of craftsmanship rather than blown up my wife's career and probably my marriage in the span of 5 minutes. I made it about halfway to my car before I heard the click of heels on pavement behind me. Bianca's voice cut through the night air like a saw blade hitting a nail. "Jared, wait." I stopped but didn't turn around. Not yet. I needed another few seconds to figure out what I was going to say to her, how I was going to handle this conversation that had been building for years without either of us realizing it. "What the hell was that?" she demanded, slightly out of breath from trying to catch up with me in those designer heels. "What were you thinking?" Now I turned around. She looked different out here under the parking lot lights, smaller somehow, less polished than she had inside the restaurant. Her perfect hair was starting to come loose from its elegant twist, and there was something wild in her eyes that I hadn't seen since we were younger and used to fight about money and the future and all those things that seem so important when you're still figuring out who you're going to be. "I was thinking," I said carefully, "that I was tired of being treated like garbage by people who wouldn't know real craftsmanship if it hit them in the face." "It was just a joke, Jared." The words came out sharper than she probably intended, echoing off the cars around us. "A stupid, harmless joke that you turned into this nuclear option. Harmless." I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Bianca, they called me clueless idiot trash at a company dinner." "Your company dinner? Your boss, who I'm pretty sure you're sleeping with, by the way, orchestrated the whole thing, and you sat there and laughed along with them." She flinched like I'd slapped her, and I knew I'd hit the mark about Lennox. The affair had been obvious to everyone except me, apparently, and even I had finally figured it out. We're not," she started, then stopped, her shoulders sagging as she realized there was no point in denying something that was written all over her face. "It's complicated, Jared." "No," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "It's really not. You either respect your husband or you don't. You either stand up for him when people humiliate him or you don't. There's nothing complicated about it." She was crying now, mascara starting to streak down her cheeks in thin black lines. You don't understand the pressure I'm under at work. The politics, the competition. I can't afford to make waves right now. Not when I'm so close to making senior partner. So you threw me under the bus instead. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I thought you'd just laugh it off, maybe make some self-deprecating joke, and then everyone would move on. I never thought you'd. What? Stand up for myself? Have some self-respect. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we'd never said to each other over the years. All the small compromises and accommodations that had seemed reasonable at the time, but had apparently been building up to this moment in a parking lot outside a restaurant where I'd just torched the professional relationship that had been keeping us financially comfortable. Do you have any idea what you've done? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's going to fire Lennox. Maybe some of the others too. And when word gets out about this, about what happened. Good, I said, and I meant it. Maybe next time they'll think twice before humiliating someone for their own entertainment. This isn't just about them, Jared. This is about us. About our life together. Reinhardt and Roe was our biggest client. Do you realize how much money we're going to lose? The word came out harder than I intended. When exactly did your affair with your boss become our problem, Bianca? She didn't answer that, just stood there crying in the parking lot while the valet attendants pretended not to notice the domestic drama playing out in front of their fancy restaurant. I pulled my car keys out of my pocket, the familiar weight of them grounding me in something real and solid. I'm going home, I said. We can finish this conversation when you're ready to be honest about what's really been going on. Jared, please. She reached out like she was going to touch my arm, then seemed to think better of it. Can't we find a way to fix this? I looked at her standing there in her beautiful silk dress, her makeup ruined and her carefully constructed professional image crumbling around her, and I felt something that might have been pity if I'd had any emotional energy left to spare. Some things can't be fixed, Bianca, I said. Some things are just broken. I got in my car and drove away, leaving her standing under the parking lot lights. In my rearview mirror, I could see her pulling out her phone, probably calling Lennox to do damage control, to figure out how to spin this disaster into something manageable. But as I drove through the quiet streets toward home, toward my workshop and my tools and the honest work that had never once made me feel small or worthless, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't broken. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time in my entire marriage, I felt completely, solidly whole. The empire they'd built on other people's humiliation was cracking, all right. And I was the one holding the sledgehammer. The first 3 days after the dinner were eerily quiet. I went about my usual routine. Coffee at 5:30, workshop by 6, working on the current projects I had lined up, but it felt different somehow, like I was moving through a world that had fundamentally changed while I slept. Bianca hadn't come home that night, and she hadn't called either. Her absence filled the house like smoke, seeping into every room and making everything feel temporary and uncertain. On Wednesday morning, I was putting the finishing touches on a jewelry box for Mrs. Peterson down on Elm Street when I heard the mail truck rumble up our driveway. Usually, I wouldn't have bothered checking it until evening. Bills and junk mail could wait, but something made me walk to the mailbox that day. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was just the need to do something normal in a week that had been anything but. The first envelope I pulled out had the Reinhardt and Roe letterhead embossed at the top, and for a second my stomach dropped. Some kind of legal threat, maybe, or a demand for payment on work I'd already completed. But when I tore it open, I found something I hadn't expected. An apology letter from Vincent Maddox, written on company letterhead and signed in his distinctive handwriting. Dear Jared, it read, I want to personally apologize for the unconscionable treatment you received at our company dinner. What happened that evening goes against every value this firm claims to represent, and I take full responsibility for creating an environment where such behavior was possible. While I know this doesn't undo the damage that was done, please know that significant personnel changes are being made to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. Your craftsmanship and professionalism have always been exemplary, and losing your partnership is a loss this company will regret for years to come. I read it twice, then set it aside and opened the second letter. This one was from someone named Delilah Morrison, a name I vaguely remembered from introductions at the dinner, but couldn't attach to a face. The handwriting was neat and precise, like someone who'd taken time to think about every word. Dear Mr. Winslow, it began. You don't know me well, but I was seated 3 chairs down from you at Friday's dinner. I work in the design department at Reinhardt and Rowe, and I wanted you to know that not everyone at that table found what happened to you amusing. In fact, I was so disgusted by the whole thing that I recorded Lennox Carter bragging about the joke to several co-workers before you arrived. I thought you should know that this wasn't just cruel. It was planned well in advance, and Lennox seemed to take particular pleasure in describing how humiliated you were going to be. My hands tightened on the letter as I kept reading. I've attached a copy of the recording to this letter. I'm not sure what you plan to do with it, but I thought you deserved to know the truth about how premeditated this attack on your dignity really was. I've also taken the liberty of sharing this recording with several people in the industry who I thought should know what kind of man Lennox Carter really is. Word travels fast in our business, and I suspect his reputation is going to suffer considerably in the coming weeks. The third envelope was thicker, official-looking, with a return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a contract from Archer & Moore Studios, one of Reinhardt and Rowe's biggest competitors, offering me an exclusive partnership to handle all their custom millwork and installations. The terms were better than anything I'd had with Reinhardt and Rowe: higher rates, more creative freedom, and a clause that guaranteed me credit in any magazine features or design awards. There was a handwritten note attached from someone named Patricia Archer. We've heard about your situation through industry channels, and we want you to know that we've always admired your work. We believe that character and craftsmanship go hand in hand, and we'd be honored to have you as a partner. If you're interested, please call me at your earliest convenience. By Thursday, my phone was ringing off the hook. Architects I'd worked with years ago, developers who'd seen my work in other people's projects, even a few residential clients who'd heard about what happened and wanted to offer their support. Word was spreading through the construction and design community faster than I'd thought possible, and apparently the story wasn't painting Reinhardt and Rowe in a very flattering light. I heard about what those jackasses did to you, said Tom Rodriguez, a contractor I'd collaborated with on several projects over the years. Hell, Jared, everybody's heard about it by now. That recording Delilah Morrison's been sharing around has made Lennox Carter about as popular as a tax audit. Nobody wants to work with those people anymore. What recording? I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew. You haven't heard it yet? Man, you need to listen to this thing. Carter's basically bragging about how he came up with the idea to humiliate you, talking about how funny it was going to be to watch you squirm. Real class act, that guy. Anyway, the reason I'm calling is I've got 3 clients who specifically asked if I knew how to get in touch with you. Seems like people respect a man who stands up for himself. Friday brought more of the same. A custom kitchen job in Westchester, a built-in library for a law firm downtown, even an inquiry from a hotel chain about doing millwork for their entire East Coast expansion. My appointment book, which had been looking pretty sparse after cutting ties with Reinhardt and Rowe, was suddenly packed solid for the next 6 months. That evening, I was in the workshop organizing all the new contracts and proposals when my phone rang one more time. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway. Is this Jared Winslow from Craftwise Builds? The voice was warm, professional, with just a hint of a southern accent. Yes, this is Jared. Mr. Winslow, my name is Michael Chun, and I'm a producer for a home renovation show on the Home and Garden Network. We've been hearing some interesting stories about you this week, and we're wondering if you might be interested in discussing a potential partnership. I almost laughed. A week ago, I'd been sitting at a dinner table being treated like trash by people who thought they were better than me. Now television producers were calling to offer me work. What kind of partnership? I asked. We're developing a new series about craftsmen who prioritize quality and integrity over profit margins. Men and women who do things the right way, even when the wrong way would be easier. From what we've heard, you might be exactly the kind of person we're looking for. I looked around my workshop, at the tools my father had given me, at the projects in various stages of completion, at the honest work that had never once made me feel small or worthless, and I smiled. Tell me more, I said, because sometimes, when one door closes, the whole damn world opens up. By Monday morning, the house had developed a kind of echo that hadn't been there before. Every footstep seemed too loud, Every door closing sounded like a gunshot, and the coffee maker's morning gurgle filled the kitchen with a loneliness I'd never noticed when Bianca was around to share it. I'd gotten used to her absence over the past week. The empty side of the bed, the bathroom counter clear of her products, the refrigerator staying exactly as full as I'd left it, but I hadn't expected the silence to feel so heavy. I was sitting at the kitchen table, going through the stack of new contracts that seemed to grow every day, when I heard her key in the front door. It was just past 7 in the morning, earlier than she'd ever voluntarily gotten up in all the years we'd been married, and something about the timing told me this wasn't going to be a casual conversation about getting back together. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past week. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wasn't wearing any makeup, and the designer clothes had been replaced by jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. But it was her eyes that really caught my attention, red-rimmed and hollow, like she'd been crying for days and had finally run out of tears. "We need to talk," she said, her voice hoarse and smaller than I'd ever heard it. I gestured to the chair across from me, the same spot where she used to sit every morning reading industry blogs on her tablet while I ate breakfast and planned out my day. She sat down carefully, like the chair might collapse under her weight, and for a long moment we just looked at each other across the table that had once felt like the center of our shared life. "Vincent fired me," she said finally, the words coming out flat and matter-of-fact, like she was reading them from a script she'd memorized. "Not officially. They're calling it a voluntary resignation pending ethics review, but we both know what that means. My career at Reinhardt and Rowe is over." I nodded, but didn't say anything. What was there to say? That I was sorry? That I hadn't meant for things to go that far? Both would have been lies, and we'd had enough lies between us to last several lifetimes. "Lennox is gone too," she continued, staring at her hands folded on the table. "Vincent gave him the choice between resigning quietly or being terminated for cause. He chose to resign, but word's already gotten out about what happened. That recording Delilah made, it's everywhere now. Industry blogs, social media, even some of the trade magazines picked it up. His reputation is destroyed." She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger or hurt or even regret, but a kind of bewildered confusion, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't have enough pieces. "Why did you do that to me?" she asked, and her voice cracked on the last word. "Why did you have to take it so far? It was just a stupid joke, Jared. A mean, thoughtless joke that got out of hand. But you turned it into this nuclear weapon that destroyed everything we'd built together." I set down the contract I'd been pretending to read and really looked at her. This woman I'd loved for 8 years, who I'd supported through career changes and family drama and all the normal ups and downs that come with building a life with someone. She was sitting 3 feet away from me, but she might as well have been on another planet. "You still don't get it, do you?" I said quietly. "This isn't about the joke, Bianca. This isn't about one night at one dinner where people decided to have a laugh at my expense." "Then what is it about?" she demanded. And now there was some fire in her voice, some of the old Bianca showing through the exhaustion and defeat. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you threw away 8 years of marriage and our entire financial future because you couldn't take a little ribbing from my coworkers." "A little ribbing." I repeated the word slowly, like I was tasting something bitter. "Is that really what you think happened? You think your boss, your lover, had someone write clueless idiot trash on my place card as friendly banter?" She flinched at the word lover, but didn't deny it. We were past the point of pretending now, past the point of careful euphemisms and plausible deniability. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," she said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. "Lennox said it would just be a quick laugh, something to break the tension at the dinner. He said you'd probably make some self-deprecating joke about it, and then everyone would move on. I never thought. You never thought I'd have enough self-respect to stand up for myself." I finished for her. "You thought I'd just sit there and take it, like I always do. Like I did when your friends made comments about my little woodworking hobby. Like I did when you started working late every night and coming home smelling like someone else's cologne. Like I did when you stopped wearing your wedding ring because it didn't go with your professional image." The silence that followed was different from the empty quiet that had been filling the house all week. This was loaded silence, packed with all the things we'd been avoiding for months, maybe years. I didn't stop wearing my ring because of my image, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. No, I agreed. You stopped wearing it because you'd already checked out of this marriage. The dinner was just the first time you let me see it. She started crying then. Not the dramatic tears from the parking lot, but the quiet, helpless crying of someone who knows they've lost something important and doesn't know how to get it back. I watched her shoulders shake, listened to the soft sounds of her grief, and felt absolutely nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity, just nothing. I made a mistake, she said through her tears. I made a lot of mistakes. But I love you, Jared. I know I haven't been showing it lately, but I do love you. Can't we find a way to fix this? Can't we start over? I looked at her sitting there in our kitchen, crying over the ruins of the life we'd built together, and I realized that the man who might have said yes to that question, the man who would have been grateful for her attention, who would have been willing to pretend none of this had happened if it meant keeping the peace, was gone. Some things can't be fixed, Bianca, I said, using the same words I'd used in the parking lot. Some things are just broken. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. So that's it. 8 years of marriage, and you're just done? I thought about that question as I looked around the kitchen we'd renovated together 3 years ago, at the custom cabinets I'd built with my own hands, at the breakfast nook where we'd share. Of morning conversations about everything and nothing. Yeah, I said finally. I think I am. She nodded like she'd been expecting that answer, wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater, and stood up from the table. I'll have a lawyer contact you about the divorce, she said, her voice steady now, all business. We can split everything fairly. The house, the savings, everything. Keep the house, I said. I never liked it much anyway. And that was the truth. I'd never felt at home in this place with its open floor plans and granite countertops and carefully curated decorations. It was Bianca's house, Bianca's vision of what successful people were supposed to want. I belonged in my workshop, surrounded by the smell of wood shavings and the sound of honest work being done. She walked to the kitchen doorway, then paused and looked back at me one more time. For what it's worth, she said, I really am sorry. About all of it. I know you are, I replied. But sorry doesn't fix broken trust any more than glue fixes a piece of wood that's been cut with a chainsaw. After she left, the house was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel heavy or oppressive. It felt like freedom. 3 months later, I was standing in the executive conference room of Archer & Moore Studios, watching Patricia Archer run her fingers along the grain of the mahogany table I'd just finished installing. The morning sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the natural patterns in the wood and making them glow like they were lit from within. It was the kind of moment that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with woodworking in the first place. Not for the money or the recognition, but for the simple pleasure of creating something beautiful that would outlast the person who made it. This is extraordinary work, Jared, Patricia said, her voice filled with the kind of genuine appreciation I'd rarely heard at Reinhardt and Rowe. The joinery is flawless, and the way you've matched the grain across the entire surface. It's like looking at a single piece of wood that just happened to grow in the shape of a conference table. I smiled and ran my own hand along the surface, feeling the smoothness that had taken 3 coats of hand-rubbed finish and countless hours of sanding to achieve. That's the idea. Most people rush the matching process, but if you take the time to really study the wood, to understand how it wants to fit together, you can create something that looks like nature intended it that way. Well, our clients are going to be impressed, Patricia said, pulling out her phone to take photos. Speaking of which, the Meridian Hotel Group loved the samples you sent for their downtown project. They want to move forward with the full contract. All the lobby furniture, the front desk, and the millwork for their premium suites. It's a 6-figure deal, Jared. Probably the biggest single contract you've ever taken on. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Meridian Hotel Group was the same company that owned the Meridian Restaurant, where my marriage had essentially ended over a place card and a room full of cruel laughter. Now they were offering me the kind of work that would establish Craftwise Builds as a major player in the luxury hospitality market. What about the timeline? I asked, already mentally calculating the materials I'd need and the additional help I might have to hire. They want to break ground on the project next month, with the millwork installation scheduled for early fall. I know it's ambitious, but they specifically requested you after seeing some photos of your previous work. Apparently, word has gotten around about your, shall we say, principled approach to business. That was Patricia's diplomatic way of referring to what had happened at Reinhardt and Rowe. The story had become something of a legend in the design and construction community. The craftsman who'd walked away from a lucrative partnership rather than tolerate disrespect. It had opened doors I never would have imagined, brought me clients who valued integrity as much as skill, and turned Craftwise builds from a one-man operation into something that was starting to resemble a real company. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see it was from Tom Rodriguez, the contractor who'd been one of the first to call after the dinner incident. Just saw the article in Architectural Digest. The message read, "You're famous now, my friend. Well deserved." I frowned and looked at Patricia. "What article?" She grinned and pulled out her tablet, scrolling through until she found what she was looking for. "I was going to mention this, but I wanted to wait until we finished discussing the hotel project. Take a look." The article was titled, "Integrity in the Age of Instagram. Why One Craftsman's Stand for Respect is Reshaping the Industry," and it featured a full-page photo of me in my workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that define my daily life. The piece went on to describe what had happened at the Reinhardt and Rowe dinner, but not in a sensational or gossipy way. Instead, it focused on the broader issues of respect, professionalism, and the value of skilled craftsmanship in a world that often prioritized flash over substance. They interviewed Vincent Maddox, Patricia said, pointing to a quote halfway down the page. "He called losing your partnership one of the biggest professional regrets of my career and said the company had implemented new policies to ensure that kind of behavior never happens again." I scrolled down and found another quote, this one from Delilah Morrison, who had apparently left Reinhardt and Rowe shortly after the dinner incident to start her own design consultancy. "Jared Winslow showed all of us that there's a difference between being professional and being a doormat," she'd said. "His willingness to walk away from a toxic situation, even at personal cost, has inspired a lot of people in this industry to examine their own standards and boundaries." The article went on to mention that several other contractors and craftspeople had come forward with their own stories of mistreatment at various firms, leading to what one industry expert called a long overdue conversation about workplace culture in the design world. "There's more," Patricia said, turning the tablet to show me another section. "They're featuring your work in next month's issue. The jewelry box you made for your anniversary, some of the custom cabinets from your residential projects, and preliminary sketches for the hotel project. You're going to be the cover story." I stared at the screen, trying to process the fact that my face was going to be on the cover of one of the most prestigious design magazines in the country. A year ago, I'd been grateful for the occasional mention in Reinhardt and Rowe's marketing materials. Now I was apparently some kind of industry spokesperson for integrity and quality craftsmanship. "How does it feel?" Patricia asked, studying my expression. "Being the face of the movement to bring respect back to skilled trades?" I thought about that question as I looked around the conference room, at the table I'd built with my own hands, at the successful partnership I'd forged with people who valued my work, at the future that was opening up in ways I never could have predicted. "Honestly," I said, "it feels like coming home." My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Jared Winslow." "Mr. Winslow, this is Sarah Chun from the Home and Garden Network. I think my brother Michael spoke with you a few months ago about a potential television project." I remembered the conversation, the producer who'd called about a show featuring craftsmen who prioritized integrity over profit. I'd been interested but hadn't heard back after our initial discussion. "Yes, I remember. Well, we've been following your story, and we'd love to move forward with that partnership we discussed. We're looking at a 13-episode first season, focusing on your approach to custom woodworking and the philosophy behind your business practices. Are you still interested?" I looked at Patricia, who was grinning like she'd just won the lottery, and thought about how far I'd come from that night at the Meridian when I'd been dismissed as clueless idiot trash. "Let's talk," I said, "because sometimes, when you stand up for yourself and refuse to accept anything less than respect, the whole world notices. And sometimes, just sometimes, they decide to build something better right alongside you." I wasn't Bianca's +1 anymore. I wasn't anybody's afterthought or comic relief or convenient target. I was Jared Winslow, craftsman and businessman, cover story and television personality, builder of beautiful things that would outlast all the petty people who'd once thought they were better than me. And I'd never needed their spotlight to shine. I never thought my wife could be this cruel. Pain, hot and searing, ripped through my stomach as I doubled over, barely able to hold myself up against the rusty gas pump. My breaths were shallow, my vision blurring at the edges, and yet, the only thing louder than the agony coursing through my body was the sound of laughter. Their laughter. Serena, my wife of 4 years, sat in the driver's seat of our luxury SUV, her manicured fingers tapping rhythmically against the wheel as she smirked at me through the open window. Her mother, Gloria, and her sister, Tessa, sat comfortably in the front and back seats, both looking at me with amusement, as if watching some pathetic, predictable sitcom. "Take a nice walk," Serena called out mockingly, her voice light, playful even, like this was all some kind of joke. Then, with a laugh that sent ice-cold betrayal down my spine, she hit the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement, kicking up dust and gravel as they sped off, leaving me behind like a discarded piece of luggage. And just like that, they were gone. For a few seconds, I just stood there, too stunned to move. My mind struggled to catch up, to process what had just happened. 1 minute, I was in the back seat of that car, groaning in discomfort as sharp pangs of nausea and pain churned through my stomach, and the next, I was alone. My legs trembled as I forced myself upright, sweat dripping down my forehead despite the dry, blistering heat of the midday sun. My body screamed in protest, every muscle tightening with each shallow breath. I pressed a hand against my lower abdomen, feeling the sharp, stabbing sensation intensify. Something was seriously wrong. My hands fumbled for my phone, but as I reached into my pocket, I remembered I didn't have it. Serena had insisted on holding onto it for safekeeping when we stopped for gas. I hadn't thought twice about it then, but now, I clenched my jaw. This wasn't just cruelty. This was calculated. A heavy wave of nausea rolled over me, and I staggered forward, barely able to focus on anything except the gas station ahead. It was an old place, one of those worn-down pit stops you only see in towns no one cares about. There was a single building attached to the pumps, faded white with peeling blue trim, its neon, open sign flickering weakly. A man stood just outside the entrance, arms crossed as he watched me with a wary gaze. He looked to be in his 60s, stocky, with silver hair and sun-weathered skin. "Hey, son," he called out as I limped toward him. "You okay?" I wasn't, but I forced out, "Just need a minute." The old man narrowed his eyes. "You don't look like you got a minute." A second later, a woman rushed out of the store behind him. She was in her 50s, dressed in a floral print dress, her expression etched with concern. "Oh dear," she gasped, gripping the man's arm. "Carl, look at him. He's burning up." I tried to wave them off, tried to tell them I was fine, but my voice cracked, the words sticking to my throat. Carl, the gas station owner, took a step forward, his keen eyes flicking toward the highway where my wife had just disappeared. "That woman just left you here?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp. I gave a weak nod. Carl muttered something under his breath, then jerked his thumb toward the building. "Come on inside. Ellen, get him some water." I didn't argue. I couldn't. With every step I took, my legs felt heavier, my vision swimming. The moment I crossed the threshold into the small air-conditioned shop, the cool air wrapped around me like a cruel reminder of how weak I'd become. My hands gripped the edge of the nearest counter as I sucked in a breath. Ellen hurried over with a bottle of water, but her gaze was locked on Carl, concern darkening her features. "Something's not right, Carl. Look at his color." She was right. Even I could feel it. Carl exhaled through his nose and tilted his head toward the security cameras mounted on the walls. "Got the whole thing on tape," he muttered. "They just drove off like you were nothing." A lump lodged itself in my throat. It wasn't just about the physical pain anymore. It was the realization that the woman I had shared a home with, a life with, the woman who had once sworn to love and protect me, had thrown me away. Like I didn't matter. Like I never had. Ellen reached for her phone. "I'm calling the news." I snapped my head toward her. "Wait." She gave me a look that left no room for argument. People need to know what kind of person does this to her own husband. Carl let out a low grunt of approval. "Damn right they do." I should have felt humiliated. I should have begged them to stop, to let me disappear quietly, to keep this shameful, gut-wrenching moment from becoming anyone else's business. But as I leaned against the counter, as my body trembled from pain and exhaustion, I realized something deep in my bones. I didn't care. Let them call the news. Let the cameras come. Let the whole world see exactly what kind of woman Serena really was. I sat in Carl's cramped office, gripping the edges of the worn wooden chair as a dull, persistent pain throbbed in my stomach. Every inhale sent a fresh jolt of agony through my body, but it wasn't just my failing appendix that made it hard to breathe. It was the weight of everything, of her. Serena. I stared at the small, oscillating fan on Carl's desk, watching the blades spin aimlessly. My fingers trembled as I pressed them against my clammy forehead, trying to piece together how I had ended up here. Not just physically, stranded in a gas station with my body betraying me, but emotionally, mentally. How had I ended up married to someone capable of this level of cruelty? I had been so sure of her once. I met Serena at a charity gala 5 years ago, the kind of upscale event I had no business attending. I wasn't born into money. I had worked my way up, a man from a modest background who had managed to carve out a successful career in finance. That night, I had been dragged to the event by a colleague who insisted I needed to network with the right people. But I hadn't cared about networking when I saw her. Serena was breathtaking, tall, poised, her red silk dress clinging to her in all the right places. Her confidence was magnetic, and when she smiled at me across the ballroom, I felt like the only man in the room. She approached me, not the other way around. "I don't recognize you," she had said, twirling her wine glass between her fingers. "First time at one of these things," I admitted. She arched a perfectly shaped brow. "Then you're either very important or very brave." I laughed. "Neither, really." She tilted her head, studying me with an intensity that sent a thrill down my spine. "We'll see about that." That night, we talked for hours. She didn't seem to care that I wasn't born into wealth, that I wasn't part of the social circles her family orbited. She was sharp-witted, quick with her laughter, and when she kissed me at the end of the night, I felt something I hadn't in years: possibility. For the first year, she was everything I had ever wanted. Passionate, supportive, my biggest cheerleader. She defended me against her family's passive-aggressive comments, rolled her eyes at her mother's condescension, and whispered in my ear that she didn't care about any of it. But after the wedding, the cracks began to show. Gloria, her mother, made it clear from the beginning that I wasn't one of them. She was the kind of woman who could compliment you while simultaneously dismantling your entire existence. "That suit is lovely," she once told me at a dinner party. "It's nice to see someone who appreciates off-the-rack options." Serena used to squeeze my hand under the table when her mother said things like that, used to roll her eyes in solidarity. But as time passed, she started laughing along with them instead. Her sister, Tessa, was worse. She loved to humiliate me in public. At a family brunch, she once ordered for me, loudly telling the waiter, "He doesn't know how to appreciate real food. Just get him something simple." Serena had giggled. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that it didn't mean anything. But it did. Things got worse when I started getting sick. The stomach pain had been there for weeks, an uncomfortable gnawing that I kept pushing aside. I had convinced myself it was stress. Work had been demanding, and my relationship with Serena had been strained. I figured I just needed a break. When she suggested a weekend getaway, I agreed, thinking maybe some time away would fix things. I should have known better when she insisted on bringing Gloria and Tessa along. The drive had been unbearable. Gloria dominated the conversation, making passive remarks about how I never seemed to be in top shape. Tessa sat in the back with me, scrolling through her phone, occasionally snickering at something before nudging Serena and whispering behind her manicured hand. And Serena? She made me sit in the back while her mother took the passenger seat. I tried to ignore the discomfort building in my gut, the way every bump in the road sent a sharp, nauseating ripple through my body. By the time we stopped at the gas station, I was sweating, my breath shallow, my stomach a mess of fire and knives. Then the pain exploded. I barely managed to open the door before I staggered out, clutching my stomach as the world tilted around me. I leaned against the car, gasping, waiting for Serena to help me, to do something. Instead, she laughed. "Drama queen," Tessa muttered, shaking her head. Gloria sighed. "For God's sake, we just stopped. Do you have to be this much of an inconvenience?" Serena just smirked. drumming her fingers against the wheel. Then she put the car in drive. "Take a nice walk," she said, her voice full of mockery. And then they were gone. Now, sitting in Carl's office, struggling to keep my hands from shaking, I felt it all settle in my bones. The truth. Serena had never truly loved me. Not in the way I had loved her. She had married me because it amused her. Because I was something different, a novelty, an escape from the rigid, suffocating life she had been raised in. But when that novelty wore off, when real life started to set in, she had followed in her family's footsteps. She had abandoned me, literally. Carl's voice cut through my thoughts. "Son, I need you to listen to me." I dragged my gaze to him. "That woman, the one you married? She ain't the same one who left you here today." He was right. I wasn't just some guy who got abandoned by his wife. I was a man who had been played, humiliated, and tossed aside. And for what? For the amusement of a woman who had once whispered that she loved me? A slow burn started in my chest, something dark and unrelenting. Carl reached over and tapped the security monitor, where the footage of Serena driving off played in a loop. "You don't have to do anything," he said, his voice steady. "The world's gonna see her for what she really is." Ellen stepped forward, phone in hand. "I've already sent the footage to the news." I took a shaky breath. Let them call the news. Let the world see the kind of person Serena really was. The pain hadn't let up. If anything, it had gotten worse. Every breath felt like I was inhaling fire. Every small movement sent a fresh wave of agony radiating through my body. My hands gripped the armrests of Carl's old office chair as I leaned back, trying to stay conscious. The smell of motor oil and stale coffee filled the room, mixing with the metallic tang of my own sweat. I knew something was wrong. Not just wrong, life-threatening. And yet, instead of an ambulance pulling up outside, I heard the distant rumble of a van and the hurried chatter of voices. "They're here," Ellen murmured from the doorway. She turned back toward me, her expression tight with sympathy. The news crew. A part of me wanted to tell her to send them away, to shut the doors and keep this humiliation as private as possible. But a larger part of me, the part that had spent years being disrespected by my wife and her family, wanted them to see. To see her. To see what kind of woman leaves her husband to die on the side of the road. A sharp knock echoed through the small gas station office before the door swung open. A woman stepped inside, dressed in a crisp blue blazer, her blonde hair neatly pinned back. She had the kind of commanding presence that made you sit up and listen, even if you weren't in the mood to talk. Lisa Monroe, the lead reporter for Channel 7 News. She took one look at me, pale, sweating, barely able to hold myself upright, and her expression morphed from professional interest to something close to horror. "You're the man who was abandoned?" she asked, stepping closer. I forced a weak nod, swallowing against the bile rising in my throat. "Yeah, that'd be me." Lisa turned to Carl. "You have the footage?" Carl grunted in response, already moving to pull up the security feed. The screen flickered, and there it was, Serena, lounging in the driver's seat of our car, smirking at me as I doubled over in pain. Gloria and Tessa laughing like this was the best joke they'd ever heard. Then the tires screeched, the SUV sped off, and I was left behind. Lisa's jaw clenched. "Unbelievable," she muttered under her breath before looking back at me. "And she really just left you here? No phone, no way to contact anyone." "She took my phone," I said, my voice hoarse. "Said she'd hold on to it for me." Lisa inhaled sharply, turning back to her cameraman. "We need to go live with this." I blinked, my brain sluggish from both the pain and the sheer insanity of the situation. "Live?" Lisa nodded. "People need to see this. They need to know." Ellen, who had been hovering near the doorway, spoke up. "I already sent the footage to a few media contacts. It's spreading fast." I barely had time to process that before Lisa's crew sprang into action. The cameraman adjusted the lights, a microphone was clipped to my shirt, and suddenly, I was sitting across from Lisa, blinking into the bright glare of the camera lens. 3, 2, 1. "We're coming to you live from a small gas station just outside of Orlando, where a shocking case of abandonment has unfolded," Lisa said, her voice smooth but urgent. She turned to me. "Sir, can you tell us what happened?" I licked my dry lips, my heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. I wasn't used to being on camera, but this wasn't about me. This was about her. "My wife," I started, my voice rough, "Serena. She left me here. I was having severe stomach pain. I told her something was wrong, but she didn't care. Her mother and sister were with us, and they just laughed. Then they drove off. Lisa nodded, giving me space to continue. They took my phone. I had no way to call for help. I swallowed hard. If it weren't for Carl and Ellen, I might not have made it. Lisa turned to Carl, who stood with his arms crossed. And you saw all of this? Carl nodded. Yep. Got the whole thing on security footage. The second I saw him struggling, I knew something was wrong. No way a man walks around looking like that unless he's real sick. Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line before she turned back to the camera. Folks, what we have here is not just a case of marital abandonment. This is cruelty. A man, in clear medical distress, was left behind by his own wife and her family, stranded without a phone, without a car, without a way to get help. And if it weren't for the kindness of strangers, he might not have survived. The cameraman panned to the security footage playing in the background, showing Serena laughing as she sped off. The sound of their laughter, so casual, so cold, echoed through the small office. Lisa looked back at me. Do you have anything you'd like to say to your wife? I exhaled, my body weak, but my voice steady. I just want people to see who she really is. The interview wrapped up, but the story was already out there. By the time Lisa's crew packed up, my phone, retrieved from Serena's abandoned luggage, which Ellen had thoughtfully gone through, was exploding with messages, texts, missed calls, social media notifications. And then, the one that caught my eye. Trending one on Twitter, wife leaves husband to die in the middle of nowhere. My stomach twisted, not just from the pain, but from the realization that this wasn't just my story anymore. It was everyone's. Serena had no idea what was coming for her. The story had gone viral, and her life was about to fall apart. A deep, unfamiliar sense of satisfaction settled in my chest. She had left me to die. Now, she was about to watch her entire world burn. I barely made it through the night. The ambulance finally arrived, sirens wailing as paramedics rushed in. By then, I was slipping in and out of consciousness, the pain so unbearable that I barely registered what was happening. I remember flashes, Ellen's worried face hovering above me, Carl's gruff voice telling me to hang in there, and the cold touch of a stretcher as they loaded me into the back of the ambulance. Then darkness. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, for drips hooked into my arm, a dull, numbing relief spreading through my body. A doctor stood beside me, flipping through my chart with a look of grim concern. You're lucky, he said, glancing at me. Your appendix ruptured. If you'd been out there much longer, we'd be having a different conversation. I exhaled shakily, staring up at the ceiling. I should have been relieved, grateful, but all I felt was an aching sense of betrayal. She really left me. Serena. The woman I had built a life with, the woman I had once sworn to protect, had laughed as she drove away, leaving me to die on the side of the road. But karma was already knocking at her door. I knew something was off the moment the doctor handed me my phone. Your friend's been calling, he said. She sounds persistent. I frowned, pressing the screen to check my notifications. Over 50 missed calls. And not from Serena. From Nicole, my best friend since college. The second I called her back, she picked up. Oh my God, you're alive, she shrieked. I swear to God, I thought you were. I'm here, I croaked, rubbing a hand over my face. Barely. She exhaled sharply. Jesus, do you even know what's happening? I frowned. What do you mean? Nicole let out a short, humorless laugh. You're all over the internet. I sat up slightly, wincing at the dull pain still throbbing in my side. What? She didn't even hesitate. You and Serena. Your story? It exploded overnight. The news station aired the footage, and then someone posted it on Twitter, and now it's everywhere. You're trending #1, dude. Serena's face is all over social media, and people are furious. I swallowed, trying to process what she was saying. She has no idea what's coming, does she? I murmured. Nicole snorted. Nope. Last I checked, she was still posting vacation selfies, totally clueless. I unlocked my phone, my fingers shaking slightly as I opened Twitter. The first thing I saw was my own face, pale, exhausted, caught in the middle of my interview with Lisa Monroe. The headline beneath it was brutal. Wife abandons husband to die, laughs as she drives away. I scrolled, my eyes widening at the sheer number of posts. Thousands of people were talking about it, commenting, sharing the footage. And the responses? They were brutal. This is the most heartless thing I've ever seen. Who does this to their own husband? Serena Wilson, you better hope you never need help, because the world is done with you. I hope this man sues the hell out of her. He almost died. Her mother and sister laughed too? What kind of monsters are they? Everywhere I looked, people were tearing Serena apart. Not just her, her whole family. Then I saw it. A screenshot of Serena's latest Instagram post. It was a picture of her, Gloria, and Tessa lounging by the beach, sunglasses on, cocktails in hand. The caption read, "Finally some peace and quiet. Beach vibes, no more drama." My stomach twisted. She had no idea. The comments under her post were merciless. Peace and quiet? Your husband almost died, you psychopath. Did you get peace after leaving your husband to suffer? You deserve everything coming your way. I hope you enjoy this vacation, because when you get back, your life is over. It was happening. The world was seeing her for who she truly was. I clenched my jaw, scrolling further, until I came across something even more shocking, a statement from her own father. My breath caught as I read his words. I am horrified and ashamed by my daughter's actions. As of today, I am cutting financial support and severing all ties. She does not represent the values of our family. I blinked, rereading it twice. Her own father had disowned her. Nicole's voice cut through my shock. Did you see it? I exhaled. Yeah, I saw it. She's done for, Nicole muttered. And you know what? She deserves it. A part of me agreed. A big part of me. But it still didn't feel real. The woman I had once loved, the woman I had fought for, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And now, the whole world knew it. I rubbed a hand over my face. This is insane. Nicole hummed. You haven't even seen the best part yet. I frowned. What do you mean? She sent me a link. I clicked it, and my screen filled with an email exchange, leaked messages between Serena and her mother. My blood turned to ice. We need to make him look unstable. Once he's out of the picture, we'll make sure he's not in the baby's life anymore. The world faded around me. Baby? I read it again, my breath catching in my throat. They weren't just trying to abandon me. They were trying to erase me. Nicole's voice was cautious. I don't know if she actually. She's pregnant? I whispered. There was silence on the other end. Then, quietly, I think she was planning to be. A cold rage settled in my chest. She had been planning to get rid of me. Not just from her life, but from her future. The phone nearly slipped from my fingers as I exhaled, trying to steady myself. This wasn't just about abandonment anymore. This was war. And Serena? She had no idea what was coming. I sat in my hospital bed, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The leaked emails between Serena and her mother replayed in my mind like a broken record. We need to make him look unstable. Once he's out of the picture, we'll make sure he's not in the baby's life anymore. Baby. The word sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through me, and this time, it had nothing to do with my ruptured appendix. Had she been planning this all along? Had our entire marriage just been some twisted setup for a future without me? Nicole's voice crackled through the phone. Are you okay? I wasn't. Not even close. But instead of saying that, I took a slow, steadying breath. I need to know more. I figured you'd say that. Nicole sighed. Look, I've been digging. Those emails. They were leaked by one of Gloria's former assistants. Apparently, she got sick of their crap and sent the messages to a journalist before quitting last month. A former assistant? That made sense. Gloria had always treated people like disposable objects. Waiters, drivers, employees. I wasn't surprised someone finally turned against her. Nicole continued, her voice edged with anger. And get this, the emails go back months. Months, man. They were talking about this while you were still living in that house. They were setting you up before you even got sick. I exhaled sharply, pressing my free hand to my forehead. Months. While I had been trying to fix my marriage, while I had been convincing myself that Serena still loved me, she had been plotting to remove me from her life. And now, the whole world knew it. I scrolled through my notifications, my eyes scanning the headlines flooding the internet. Shocking new revelations. Wife who abandoned husband caught plotting his downfall. Exclusive, leaked emails reveal Serena Wilson's sinister plans against husband. Police launch investigation into Gloria Wilson's financial dealings. My grip tightened on my phone. Wait, the police are involved. Oh yeah, Nicole said. The second those emails went public, investigators started digging into everything, and not just what they did to you. I frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated for a second before saying, "Turns out, Gloria's charity isn't as clean as she wants people to think. Reports are coming out that she's been embezzling money for years. And now that the world's watching, the authorities are actually paying attention." I let that sink in. Gloria had always been shady. She paraded herself as some high society philanthropist, but behind closed doors, she was ruthless. I had suspected for a long time that her so-called charitable donations were more about tax benefits than actual goodwill, but embezzlement? That was a whole new level. Nicole continued, her voice more urgent now. "And here's the kicker. Since those emails suggest they were trying to make you look unstable, Serena might be investigated too. If they can prove she was involved in a conspiracy to frame you, she could be facing serious charges." My heart pounded. Serena, in legal trouble. A week ago, I wouldn't have believed it. But now? It was exactly what she deserved. A sharp knock at my hospital door made me look up. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, followed by another in a police uniform. The first man flashed a badge. "Mr. Callahan?" I blinked. "Yeah. I'm Detective Marcus Hill. This is Officer Reynolds. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your wife." I didn't hesitate. "Ask me anything." The detective pulled up a chair and set a recorder on the table beside my bed. "We've been following your case, and after the recent evidence that's come to light, we're launching an official investigation into Serena Wilson and her family." My breath caught. "What kind of investigation?" "Several things," he said. "First, the abandonment itself. In this state, leaving a spouse in a life-threatening situation could be considered criminal negligence. Since your appendix ruptured, and you were in clear distress at the time, that might hold up in court." I clenched my jaw. "Good. But," he continued, "the bigger issue is these emails." He tapped his phone, probably pulling them up. "If we can prove that Serena and her mother were actively plotting against you, especially if they were trying to frame you as unstable, we could be looking at charges for conspiracy, fraud, and possibly even malicious intent to defraud an individual." I exhaled slowly. "And what about Gloria?" His expression darkened. "She's under investigation for financial crimes. The IRS is already involved. If the fraud allegations hold up, she could be facing serious jail time." I almost laughed. This was poetic justice at its finest. Serena and her family had spent years looking down on me, mocking me, treating me like I was beneath them. And now, they were the ones under scrutiny. I leaned back against the pillows, my body still weak, but my mind sharper than it had been in days. "So what happens next?" Detective Hill folded his hands. "We need to gather more evidence. Would you be willing to testify if this goes to court?" I didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." He nodded. "Good. We'll be in touch." As the officers left, I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. Serena had no idea what was coming for her. She was still sipping cocktails on the beach, still laughing with her mother and sister, still thinking she had gotten away with it. But the walls were closing in. And when she finally realized what was happening, it would be too late. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "Serena, we need to talk. Call me." I stared at the screen. A week ago, I would have jumped at the chance to hear her voice, to understand, to fix things. But now, I knew exactly what she was. A liar, a manipulator, a woman who had left her husband to die. I deleted the message without responding. Let her squirm. This was only the beginning. The first sign that Serena knew something was wrong came in the form of another text. "Serena, why aren't you answering? Call me. Now." I stared at the message, my lips curling in disgust. Oh, now she wanted to talk? Now that the whole world knew what she did? Now that her father had publicly disowned her, her family's reputation was in ruins, and the police were circling like vultures? She didn't care when I was hunched over in agony, stranded in the middle of nowhere, clutching my stomach and gasping for breath. She didn't care when she laughed and sped off with her mother and sister, leaving me to die. But now that she was the one drowning, she wanted me to throw her a lifeline. Not a chance. I locked my phone without replying, sinking deeper into my hospital bed. My body still ached, my stitches pulling uncomfortably whenever I moved, but the pain was manageable now. The real ache, the one buried in my chest, was finally starting to ease. Because for the first time in years, I had the upper hand. And Serena was about to feel every ounce of what she had done to me. I turned on the hospital TV and flipped to the news. Her face was everywhere. Exclusive, Leaked emails reveal Serena Wilson's attempt to frame husband. High society scandal. Gloria Wilson under IRS investigation for financial crimes. Police considering charges against Serena Wilson for abandonment and fraud. A clip played on screen. Footage from a local news crew who had tracked Serena down at the luxury resort where she, Gloria, and Tessa had been hiding out. The camera zoomed in as a reporter shoved a microphone toward her. Serena, do you have anything to say about the allegations against you? The leaked emails? The police investigation? Serena's expression was tight, her usual composure cracking. She wore oversized sunglasses, her lips pressed into a firm line. No comment, she snapped, shoving past the reporter. Tessa, walking beside her, was less controlled. This is harassment. We're being bullied. Bullied? I let out a bitter laugh. These women had spent years making my life miserable, treating me like I was disposable. Now they were getting a taste of their own medicine. The reporter didn't let up. Serena, did you abandon your husband at a gas station while he was suffering from a medical emergency? Serena stopped in her tracks, turning toward the camera. That story has been blown way out of proportion, she said, forcing a tight-lipped smile. People love to twist things to fit a narrative. My husband, ex-husband, is exaggerating. Ex-husband? My jaw clenched. So that's the game she was playing. She thought she could get ahead of the scandal by making it seem like we were already done, like she was the one choosing to move on. Pathetic. Then, the reporter fired the shot that changed everything. What about the life insurance policy, Serena? Serena stiffened. Tessa gasped, looking at her sister in alarm. The reporter continued, her voice sharp as a blade. Public records show that you took out a substantial life insurance policy on your husband just days before your trip. Care to explain? I sat up, my pulse hammering. Wait, what? I grabbed my phone and immediately dialed Nicole. She picked up instantly. Dude, did you see that? Tell me it's not true, I said, my voice dangerously low. Nicole hesitated. I wish I could. I squeezed my eyes shut, my fingers digging into the hospital blanket. Serena had taken out a life insurance policy on me. Days before she left me to die. The betrayal sliced deeper than I thought possible. I had spent years loving this woman, defending her, trying to see the best in her. And she had been planning my funeral. Listen, Nicole said carefully. The police are already investigating it. If they can prove she had any intent. They already have intent, I growled. The emails, the footage, the policy. Nicole sighed. Then she's in deep. I looked back at the TV. Serena had turned away from the reporter, but she was flustered now, her body rigid. We're done here, she snapped, storming toward the hotel entrance. But the damage was done. The internet was already exploding. Serena Wilson took out life insurance on her husband before leaving him to die. New evidence suggests abandonment may have been attempted murder. I couldn't breathe. Murder. She had wanted me dead. A slow, dark rage settled deep in my bones. I had spent so much time trying to understand why Serena changed. Why she went from the woman who had once whispered that she loved me to the woman who laughed while abandoning me at a gas station. But it didn't matter anymore. I didn't care why. I only cared about one thing. Justice. My phone buzzed again. A new text. Serena, please. We need to talk. Call me. I stared at it, my fingers hovering over the screen. Then I smirked. She was panicking. Good. I typed back 2 words. Talk to your lawyer. Then I blocked her number. She had made her bed. Now, she was going to choke on it. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was still early, barely past 6 in the morning. But the moment I saw the caller ID, I sat up, fully alert. Detective Hill. I exhaled sharply before answering. Detective. His voice was steady, professional, but there was something in his tone that sent a thrill of satisfaction through me. Just thought you'd like to know. We picked her up this morning. I swung my legs over the edge of the hospital bed, suddenly wide awake. Serena? Serena. Her mother. And, given the circumstances, her sister's been brought in for questioning too. I squeezed the phone tighter. How? Detective Hill let out a short chuckle. You're not going to believe this. Serena was trying to board a private plane. I stilled. She was leaving the country? Looks that way, Hill confirmed. Apparently, she thought she could ride this out at some family friend's estate in Europe. But the second we got the warrant, her name went straight into the system. TSA flagged her passport. The moment she showed up at the airport, we had officers waiting. I ran a hand down my face. a dark chuckle escaping my lips. Serena, always so sure she was untouchable, always believing her family's wealth and influence would shield her from the consequences of her actions. But now, she was sitting in a holding cell, and it was all her own doing. I leaned back against the bed, letting the news settle in my bones. What about Gloria? He'll let out a low whistle. That woman's got more skeletons than a damn cemetery. The IRS is already on her tail for embezzlement, but we've also uncovered dozens of fraudulent donations linked to her charity. He paused. And as for the life insurance policy on you, we're working with the insurance company now, but things aren't looking good for her. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Good. Serena had always acted like she was invincible, like the world revolved around her, and she could do whatever she wanted, no matter who it hurt. But now, for the first time in her life, she had to face reality. Hill's voice turned more serious. Listen, we'll need you to come in for a formal statement soon. And you should know, her lawyer is already trying to spin this as a misunderstanding. They're going to fight this. I scoffed. Of course they are. But, Hill continued, with the emails, the footage, the leaked insurance records, they don't have much of a case. She might be able to weasel her way out of the more serious charges, but even if she does, her reputation is ruined. And for Serena, that was the real punishment, wasn't it? Losing her wealth? Her connections? The cushy life she had always depended on? She wouldn't survive that. And I would be just fine. Hill wrapped up the call, promising to keep me updated, and I hung up, staring at the blank hospital wall in front of me. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways. I had fantasized about the day Serena would face consequences, about the day her carefully curated life would come crumbling down. And now, it had finally happened. So why did I feel empty? I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. Because, despite everything, there had been a time when I had loved her, a time when I had looked at Serena and seen my future. I shook my head, pushing the thought away. That version of Serena had never existed. It had been an illusion, a mirage of love built on lies and manipulation. The real Serena? She had never loved me. And now, the whole world knew it. I spent the rest of the morning watching the news unfold. Serena's arrest was everywhere. Reporters stationed outside the police station. Cameras capturing the moment she was led inside. Her face pale, her perfect composure cracking. She looked furious, humiliated. Good. The commentators on TV tore into her without mercy. This is what happens when people believe they're above the law. She abandoned her husband in his weakest moment, and now she's paying the price. Let's not forget. The only reason this came to light is because of that gas station security footage. If Carl and Ellen hadn't stepped in, would we even know the truth? Every word felt like another victory. And then came the best part. Gloria's charity shut down amid fraud investigation. I nearly laughed. For years, Gloria had paraded herself as a philanthropist, acting as if she was some kind of saint. But now, her empire was crumbling. Serena and her family had spent years looking down on me, making me feel less than. But now, they had nothing. And I was finally free. Later that afternoon, Nicole came to visit. She strolled into my hospital room with a bag of fast food, setting it down on the tray beside my bed. Figured you could use something better than hospital food. I smirked, grateful. You are a lifesaver. She plopped down in the chair beside me, crossing her legs. So, how does it feel? I raised an eyebrow. How does what feel? She gestured toward the TV, which was still covering Serena's downfall. The woman who ruined your life is in a jail cell. Her mom's probably going to prison. Her family is disgraced. You won. I leaned back, thinking about her words. I had won. And yet, I didn't feel as triumphant as I thought I would. I exhaled. I don't know. It's not like this erases everything, you know? Nicole nodded, her expression softening. Yeah, I get that. She studied me for a moment before saying, so what now? That was the real question, wasn't it? For so long, my life had revolved around Serena, trying to make her happy, trying to fit into a world that never wanted me. And now, I had to figure out who I was without her. I glanced down at my hands, flexing my fingers. I think I start over. Nicole smiled. That's a good plan. I nodded, feeling something settle in my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't trapped. I wasn't stuck in a toxic marriage. I wasn't being used, manipulated, or discarded. I was free, and I had my whole life ahead of me. The hospital room was eerily quiet after Nicole left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The soft beeping of the heart monitor filled the air, a reminder that I was still here, still breathing, despite everything. For the past 4 years, my life had revolved around Serena, trying to meet her expectations, trying to fit into a world that constantly reminded me I didn't belong. Every decision, every compromise, every sacrifice had been made to keep her happy. And for what? So she could leave me for dead at a gas station? So she could take out a life insurance policy on me? So she and her family could laugh as they drove away, fully believing they'd never have to deal with me again? My jaw tightened, and I sat up straighter, ignoring the dull ache in my side. Not anymore. I was done living for Serena. Done trying to make sense of her cruelty. Done feeling like I wasn't enough. For the first time in years, I had no one to answer to. No one controlling my choices. No one dictating what I wore, where I ate, who I spent time with. I was free. And yet, the thought of starting over felt strange. Because if I wasn't Serena's husband, then who was I? A nurse walked in then, interrupting my spiraling thoughts. She smiled politely as she checked my for. "How are we feeling today, Mr. Callahan?" I exhaled slowly. Better. It wasn't a lie. Physically, I was healing. My body was slowly regaining its strength. But mentally, emotionally, that was a different story. "Well, the good news is, your vitals look great," the nurse continued. "If everything stays stable, you should be discharged by tomorrow morning." Tomorrow. I swallowed. Where was I even supposed to go? The house Serena and I shared wasn't an option. Even if she wasn't legally allowed to return there, I had no interest in stepping foot in that place again. Every room would be tainted with memories of her, of us, and I refused to let her haunt me any longer. The nurse gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder before leaving the room. I sat there, staring at the blank TV screen, feeling like I was standing at the edge of something big. A new beginning. I just had to decide what to do with it. The next morning, I was cleared for discharge. Nicole showed up right on time, her car already waiting outside the hospital entrance. "You ready?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat, adjusting my seatbelt. I glanced at the hospital behind me, then at the open road ahead. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." Nicole pulled onto the main road, the city skyline in the distance. "So, where to?" That was the question, wasn't it? I hesitated before saying, "Not the house." Nicole snorted. Obviously. She drummed her fingers on the steering wheel, thinking, "Well, I have a guest room. You're welcome to crash there until you figure things out." I looked at her, surprised. "You sure?" Nicole rolled her eyes. "Dude, you almost died. I think I can let you crash at my place for a bit." I exhaled, some of the tension leaving my shoulders. "Thanks." She waved it off. "Just promise me one thing." I raised an eyebrow. "What?" Nicole shot me a sideways glance. "That you won't let this whole Serena thing define you." I opened my mouth to argue, but she cut me off. "I'm serious, man. You've spent years letting that woman walk all over you. And yeah, she's finally getting what she deserves. But if you spend the rest of your life just waiting for her downfall, then she still wins." I stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Nicole wasn't wrong. Revenge had kept me going these past few days. The thought of seeing Serena finally pay for everything she'd done had fueled me through the pain, the betrayal, the public humiliation. But now, she was facing charges. Her family's empire was crumbling. Her cushy life of wealth and privilege was gone. I had already won. So why did it feel like I was still stuck in the past? Nicole sighed, softening. "Look, I know it's not that simple. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to feel everything. But don't let her steal any more of your time, okay? You deserve better." I let her words sink in. She was right. I had wasted enough time on Serena. It was time to start thinking about me. Nicole's apartment was small but cozy, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. She handed me a spare key and gestured toward the guest room. "Make yourself at home," she said. "Fridge is stocked. Bathroom's down the hall. And if you eat my last slice of pizza, I will murder you in your sleep." I let out a tired chuckle. Noted. For the first time in days, I felt safe. Not just physically, but emotionally. This wasn't a place filled with bad memories. It wasn't haunted by Serena's presence. It was new. And maybe that was exactly what I needed. Over the next few days, I tried to settle into some kind of routine. I went for walks, caught up on sleep, ate actual meals instead of hospital food. And slowly, the weight of everything that had happened began to lift. But the real moment of clarity came when I found myself scrolling through the news one night, searching for updates on Serena. Her trial was still pending. Her lawyers were scrambling to control the damage. The media had moved on to the next scandal. And I realized I didn't care anymore. For so long, my life had revolved around Serena. But for the first time, I wasn't thinking about her. I was thinking about me, about what I wanted, about who I was without her. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. One afternoon, as I was sitting on Nicole's couch, flipping through job listings, she plopped down beside me with a mischievous grin. "So," she said, nudging me with her elbow. "What's next?" I thought about it. For so long, my plans had been tied to Serena. But now, I could go anywhere, do anything. I smirked. "I think I'm finally ready to start over." Nicole grinned. "Damn right you are." I looked out the window, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. A new life was waiting for me. And this time, I wasn't going to waste it. The world had moved on from the scandal. For weeks, Serena's name had dominated headlines. The footage of her abandoning me at the gas station played on repeat across every news network. The internet had torn her apart, dissecting every detail of her privileged, heartless life. The leaks, the financial fraud, the life insurance policy. It had all painted a picture of a woman who saw people as disposable. But like all things, the public's attention eventually shifted. A new scandal took center stage, another rich, heartless socialite caught doing something unforgivable. The cameras moved, the hashtags faded, and Serena Wilson became just another disgraced name in the archives of social media outrage. But for me, the damage she left behind wasn't something I could scroll past or forget. Because while she could disappear into whatever new hell she had built for herself, I had to live with the scars. Not just the physical ones, the still healing incision from my emergency surgery, but the emotional wreckage she had left behind. I was still untangling the mess she had made of my life. Her betrayal had changed everything. I spent my mornings at Nicole's apartment, sipping coffee and watching the city come to life from her tiny balcony. The view wasn't much, a few office buildings, a crowded bus stop, but it was mine for now. A place free of Serena. I had started therapy. That was Nicole's doing. She had practically dragged me to my first session, ignoring my protests. "You don't have to be fine just because she got what she deserved," she had said. "That doesn't mean you don't have things to work through." And she was right. Serena's downfall didn't erase the years I had spent in a toxic marriage. It didn't undo the manipulation, the loneliness, the feeling of never being enough. The therapist, Dr. Ellis, was a middle-aged woman with a calm, no-nonsense demeanor. "She conditioned you," she had said during our second session. "Made you believe that her love was something you had to earn, that you had to prove you were worthy of it." I scoffed. Guess I never proved myself enough. Dr. Ellis had tilted her head. Or maybe, the problem was never you to begin with. That thought had stuck with me. For years, I had bent over backward trying to be the husband Serena wanted. I had made excuses for her, ignored the red flags, convinced myself that if I just tried harder, she'd love me the way I loved her. But she never had. And now I was finally realizing that wasn't my failure. It was hers. One afternoon, Nicole barged into the apartment, waving her phone in the air. "You're not going to believe this." I barely looked up from my laptop. "Another Serena headline?" "No," she said, flopping onto the couch beside me. "Better." She shoved her phone in my face. I blinked. It was a news article. New legislation proposed after high-profile abandonment case. My brows furrowed. "What is this?" Nicole grinned. "They're calling it the Callahan Protection Act." My stomach dropped. "What, dude?" she said, practically vibrating with excitement. "Your case went so viral that lawmakers are actually trying to pass a bill making it illegal to abandon a spouse in a medical emergency." I stared at the article, trying to process it. It wasn't just a headline. It was real. Lawmakers were proposing actual, tangible consequences for people like Serena. People who thought they could throw someone away and never face repercussions. I exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over my face. "Jesus." Nicole nudged me. "Not bad for a guy who almost got left for dead, huh?" I let out a breathy laugh. "Yeah, not bad at all." It wasn't just about me anymore. My story, the pain Serena had put me through, was becoming something bigger, something that could actually help people. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to peace. A week later, I got the call I had been waiting for. Detective Hill's voice was steady as ever. It's official. Serena took a plea deal. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of deal? She's pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and reckless endangerment. In exchange, the prosecution is dropping the more serious charges. I swallowed. So what's her sentence? 5 years in prison. I exhaled slowly, letting the number sink in. 5 years. Serena, who had spent her whole life believing she was untouchable, was going to spend half a decade behind bars. It wasn't life. It wasn't the kind of brutal, eye-for-an-eye justice the internet had demanded. But it was something, and it was more than I ever thought she'd face. What about Gloria? I asked. Hill's voice darkened. That woman's going away for a long time. Between the IRS charges and the financial fraud, she's looking at 15 to 20 years. A satisfied hum settled in my chest. They had spent their entire lives using money and power to step on people like me. And now, that same power had turned against them. Thanks for letting me know, I said. Hill hesitated. I mean this sincerely, Callahan, what you went through. It was hell, but you came out of it stronger. And now, you get to move on. I nodded. Yeah, I do. And for the first time, I actually believed it. That night, I sat on the balcony, staring out at the city skyline. I thought about Serena, not in the way I used to, not with longing or regret, but with clarity. She had tried to break me, and she had failed. I had survived. I had rebuilt. And now, I had an entire life ahead of me, one that had nothing to do with her. I took a slow, steady breath and let it all go. The pain, the betrayal, the weight of the past. And when I finally stood up and walked inside, I knew. I was free. The sky stretched above me, endless and bright, as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment. It wasn't anything grand, just a simple place in the city, far from the world Serena and her family had once forced me to inhabit. But it was mine. No more cold, sterile rooms filled with expensive furniture I had never been comfortable in. No more walking on eggshells, trying to prove I was good enough for people who never truly saw me. No more waking up every morning to a woman who had been plotting my downfall while pretending to love me. I was done with all of it. For the first time in years, I was living for me. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. Serena's sentencing had made headlines, but the media had quickly moved on. The world had found its next scandal to feast on, leaving her to fade into irrelevance. She had called me once from jail. I hadn't answered. She had sent a letter, filled with empty justifications and self-pity. I had thrown it away without reading past the first line. Serena was nothing to me now, and yet, I knew that for the rest of her life, she would remember me. She would remember the man she left for dead. The man who not only survived, but thrived. And that, in itself, was justice. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee as I scrolled through my emails. Work inquiries were finally piling up again. It had taken time, but I was rebuilding my career. I wasn't the same man I had been before Serena. I was smarter now, wiser, more cautious about who I let into my life. I wouldn't let anyone manipulate me like that again. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened it, Nicole stood on the other side, holding a 6-pack of beer and a bag of takeout. I come bearing gifts, she said with a smirk, stepping inside. I chuckled. What's the occasion? Nicole dropped the food on the table and turned to me, grinning. No occasion. Just figured we should celebrate the fact that your life no longer revolves around a psychotic ex-wife. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help but smile. She wasn't wrong. We settled into our usual routine, eating takeout on the couch, watching bad reality TV, laughing at how ridiculous people could be. Halfway through our meal, Nicole turned to me, her expression more serious. So, what's next for you? I chewed thoughtfully. It was a question I had been asking myself a lot lately. For years, my future had been tied to Serena. Every decision I made had been about us. Our home, our marriage, our plans. Now, those chains were gone, and I could finally ask myself, what do I want? I don't know, I admitted. But for the first time, I'm okay with that. Nicole grinned. Good answer. I took another sip of my beer, leaning back into the couch. What about you? What's next? She smirked. Making sure you don't turn into a bitter old man who spends his life ranting about his ex-wife. I laughed. Fair enough. Nicole nudged me playfully. I mean it. You're a good guy, Callahan. You deserve happiness. For the first time in a long time, I believed her. I wasn't just the man who had been abandoned. I wasn't just the guy from the viral story. I was me, and I was finally ready to start living again. A few days later, I got a call from Lisa Monroe, the reporter who had broken my story. She wanted to do a follow-up. I hesitated at first. Did I really want to talk about Serena again? Did I want to keep reopening that wound? But then I thought about how many people had reached out to me. Strangers who had been in toxic marriages, who had been gaslit and manipulated, who had felt trapped the way I once had. My story had given them something. Hope. The courage to walk away. Maybe it was time to share the final part of it. The studio was bright, cameras positioned at different angles as Lisa greeted me with a warm smile. She sat across from me, microphone clipped to her blazer. "It's good to see you again, Callahan." I nodded. "Good to be here." Lisa studied me for a moment. "You look lighter." I exhaled. "Because I am." She smiled. "Let's talk about that." The interview started off as expected. She recapped everything that had happened, from the gas station abandonment to Serena's sentencing. Then, she leaned forward, voice softer. "What do you want people to take away from your story?" I thought about it for a moment. Then, I met her gaze and said, "That sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing for you." Lisa nodded, waiting for me to continue. "For years, I convinced myself that Serena was the best thing in my life," I said. "I made excuses for her. I ignored the red flags. I let her manipulate me into thinking I wasn't enough." I exhaled. But she left me. She showed me who she really was. And as much as it hurt, it set me free. Lisa's expression was unreadable. "And now," I smiled. "Now, I finally get to live." The cameras kept rolling, but for the first time, I didn't care. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was my story, and it was just beginning.